Listen, it's an absolute pleasure to be here with Dropbox in these great new offices, and it's really lovely to have you here, Drew. I have to say, I would have been following your progress over the years. I'm just going to introduce Drew properly to the rest of you as well. So, Drew Houston co founded Dropbox back in 2007 with Arash Ferdowsi. He's led its growth from a simple idea to a product used by, as Philippe said, I think about over 500 million around the world today. Before founding Dropbox, Drew received his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT back in 2006. And he's won multiple accolades, as you probably know, including being named to MIT Technology Review's TR35 list, which honours the world's top innovators under 35. So I mean, that's only touching on your CV. And you were telling me earlier that you started coding at the age of 5, am I right?
My dad, still working? Okay. Yeah, my dad showed. I wrote my first lines of basic code when I was 5.
Good to start early, isn't it? So yeah, I know it started there probably, but tell me a little bit more about how you started your career in tech.
Sure. So first, thank you everyone for coming, and it's really great to be here and to be back in Dublin. Well, yeah, how I got into tech was kind of related to that story, where I was just a little kid, and there was this glowing screen in my living room, and and a lot of buttons, and that was very appealing to me as a very little kid. And my dad and I loved playing computer games, so that was like step one. And then I wanted to make my own computer games, and so that was really the start of the path. I thought that was going to be my career, is coming up with um, is building games, and that was actually my first internship. Kind of, I worked remotely for an online game maker when I was in high school, and worked for a bunch of local startups, and then just jumped from thing to thing through high school and college, and caught the bug, and that's when I knew I broadened my interests beyond games, but that's when I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Was it in college that that really changed beyond that it spread out beyond just games?
I was in high school, so I was able the game company I worked for. Um, I actually got hired because I was originally signed up to test the game. I was a beta tester, and they were I felt like they weren't building the game fast enough, and so I was getting bored. And then you have a lot of time on your hands in middle school and high school, so I ended up kind of poking around under the hood, and I found all these security problems. And so there was a little bit of mischief. I ended up, you could do things like I could you sort of make yourself God in the game, and but I was like, then I emailed the developers. I'm like, hey, you really need to fix these things, and here's this problem. Here's how you fix it. Here's this problem. And then they were like, great. Do you want to fix it? And uh, and I was like, well, you guys are in Colorado. I can't really move out there, but if you let me work remotely, I can do that. And they're like, okay, that's fine. And I'm like, is it okay if my dad signs all the paperwork because I'm not 18? But that was my first startup experience. I ended up getting stock options that were worth nothing, and that was the first of a few experiences like that too. Um, but it was really fun. And then that was the first stepping stone to then getting programming jobs at local companies outside of Boston, where I grew up.
And what spurred you to found Dropbox? Where did that come from? Where did even the idea come from originally?
Well, it was born out of frustration, and so the first lines of code for Dropbox were written on a bus ride. When I had my computer with me, but I realized just as I sat down on the bus and opened up my computer um, that my thumb drive was sitting back in my computer at home, and I had a bunch of work I needed to do on a previous company that I had started in college. But now I didn't have my stuff, it was going to be a very long bus ride. And this was 2006 when this happened. So this was before the iPhone. These were the days when if you didn't have anything to do, like you really didn't have anything to do. So it's like 4 hours of frustration and self-flagellation, being like, why am I so? Because I wasn't like, oh, I hate my thumb drive. I'm like, I hate myself. I'm so disorganized. Um, but then after that, I'm like, okay. Well, then I opened up the editor and started writing some code, having no idea what it would become. But then I also shortly thereafter teamed up with Arash, my co-founder, and the two of us studied computer science together at MIT. And I graduated, he dropped out, so we have that startup checkbox done thanks to Arash. But yeah, it was kind of wild. We didn't. A lot of these stories start out where, oh yeah, we played, uh, you know, baseball together as little kids. No, Arash and I didn't know each other really before starting the company. But after meeting, maybe we spent a few hours together, and next thing you know, he drops out of school, um, and then we were off and running.
Incredible. It's amazing how many innovations come out of frustration. I think we would all agree. Tell me a little bit about, I mean, that's 10 years now, or the best part of anyway, that you've been on that entrepreneurial journey. And I mean, obviously, there have been ups and downs. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the lessons that you've learned along the way?
Well, I think first is I think one thing that made a really big difference between my first company and Dropbox was, I just found this problem fascinating. It wasn't so frustration was part of it, and not wanting to have to email myself files or back up my computer, all the things you used to have to do. But then from school and otherwise, it was really fascinating to me. Like, all right, how did you solve that problem? And it intersected with a lot of my interests from school. Like, I loved algorithms, I loved distributed systems, I loved design, and operating systems and all these things. And the problem we were solving was at the intersection of all of those. And so I became obsessed with it. And so I think that, you know, everybody's gonna say, "Oh, do something you love or passion," but I think you want to do something that you can be like totally obsessed with, but then also is something that the world really needs. And so that because it's a really hard thing to do to start a company. And I found that with starting my first company, which was it was online test prep. So I imagine most of you have not had the privilege or delight of taking the SAT to apply to American colleges. But that's something a lot of American high school students have to do. I'm sure you have your equivalent. I know you're not off the hook. But anyway, so, but that was my first company. And while I really loved the idea of starting a company and being a founder, when it came to writing, the actual job of starting a test prep company, you know, kind of gets a little old because I just remember being in my room, you know, writing yet more math questions about parallel lines. And, you know, I love standardized tests as much as any hormonally balanced person can, but at some point I was like, okay, I sort of started burning out. And so Dropbox is completely different because I love all of I just find out all the different elements of building the business and the subject matter fascinating. And so I think if you need an obsession like that. And so that's the first thing. And the second would be just handpicking the best people. At MIT, it was really amazing the talent pool there. And if I hadn't gone there, I wouldn't have met that's where I met Arash. And a lot of the earliest folks in the company were the smartest friends that we knew from there. And it's a lot of work, but if you can get the best people, it both attracts more good people, but it makes all the difference.
Would you say there are people who particularly have been an inspiration for you? And I mean, would you have advice for business leaders as regards who they should be listening to, you know, as regards mentors from within the organization, without the organization?
Sure. So I think there's something inspirational about all the great tech companies, and so and something to learn from each. So if you think about Amazon or Apple or Google or Facebook and this generation, but then even going back, I find people like Andy Grove, who was the CEO of Intel, really amazing. And so I love reading. Reading is probably the single most helpful thing that I've done to try to stay in front of all the things you need to know in running a company. And then so that's part of it, and like figuring out, okay, how were those companies built? What was important to them? They're all very different in some ways. Second is surrounding yourself with great people. So both from the beginning, we had mentors who were great entrepreneurs and who had built really successful companies. And one of the great things about Silicon Valley or any ecosystem is that you have people who have done it before, and those people had help on the way up, and they're often willing to help you and that was certainly the case with us. So we had a whole bunch of experienced entrepreneurs as angel investors, and a lot of our venture capital investors had a front row seat to really great companies being built. So the mentorship part is really valuable. And then we've brought in some amazing folks to help build the company. And so think about Dennis had a huge, an amazing run at Google and had a lot of responsibility there. I think about our CTO, Aditya. He was employee number 9 at Facebook or something. And so he watched as that took off. And so bringing in folks that can help you learn faster, and then also who know what to do and can help spread the load of the actual work of building the company.
And I mean, for a company that has grown so much and quite quickly, I mean, how important is the board? And tell me a little bit about the challenges of building a board and how you take direction from them or direct them.
Well, fundamentally, the board is there to, you're all there to so the board is the formal governing body of the company, but really they're most helpful when you're all just sitting around the table trying to make the company as good as it can be. And so I think when constructing your board, what at least my experience has been, you want folks who can help you see around corners. And for us, we were like, we want folks who have really seen scale. And so when you look at the last few directors that we've added, we've probably starting with Condoleezza Rice, who's the U.S. Secretary of State. And you're talking about seeing scale. Like the State Department is like an 85,000 person organization. And then she was provost at Stanford, which is kind of like the COO or the, really running a lot of the day-to-day of a more than 10,000 person organization. She had been on boards, public company boards, places like HP, Chevron. And so she had seen scale and across many different public sector, private sector, and government, in academia. And so, and her stories are the best. Because we're like, oh, we have this personnel problem. And she's like, well, let me tell you about the day after 9/11. And you're like, okay. But so she's been amazing. And then other great leaders. So Bob Mylod was the number 2 at Priceline. He was CFO there for a long time. So he saw them go way up, and they go way down, and then go way up again. And then most recently, we've added Paul Jacobs, who's the chairman and former CEO of Qualcomm. And he's also an engineer who trained himself to be a great CEO, and he oversaw the growth of that company as to many tens of billions of dollars market cap. And so all of those, I've learned a lot from each of them, and all of our directors have seen really big scale.
A founder-led business, and I know there are various founder-led businesses, founders out there. How do you think about succession? Is it something you think about? Do you think about what comes next?
Well, I'm not going anywhere, at least I hope not. But I think when you look at the arc of other companies or other transitions, I think whether it's your succession plan for you personally or for your team, it's all about building a great bench. And so maybe a few years ago, I spent a ton of time recruiting my immediate team, but now I spend a lot more time helping my reports build the next level of or build out their teams. And so that and then that's those people continue to become the senior leaders in the company. And so we have many of when I look at my management team, many of them have had if you think about like Dennis and Aditya and others, they've all been had big roles at other hypergrowth companies, and then a couple others on my team. If I think about Akhil, our VP of Infrastructure, or Ajay, our CFO, or Bart, our General Counsel, they joined the company and rose up to that level. And so you want a mixture of both experience and kind of homegrown talent who really understand the company and the culture.
And getting down then, down even to the bottom up, I mean, how do you think in a company that's gone from a Y Combinator startup, am I right, to a company with 500 million customers, how do you think about how you recruit your talent? I mean, are there big challenges finding the right engineers, product designers, you name it?
It's always hard. I mean, every founder every manager, every leader will say, "Oh yeah, no, we want the best people," but no one says like, "Well, we want mediocre people." um, and so the challenge is is that every good person you want probably already has a good job, and so and they're rarely looking, and so in many cases we've had to latch on to people, and you meet them a couple of years, and uh, and they don't join right away, but you have to build a relationship with them or keep chipping away over a long period of time. I think the record for this was we made someone an offer, um, and it was probably between getting his first offer and finally accepting an offer from us was 6 years.
Okay, that's a
So
determination.
I don't necessarily recommend that. Like you don't have that kind of time, but we're obsessive about it. Like we keep track of like who are the best people we work with, and often when we bring people in the company, we shake them down, be like, all right, who are the best people you've worked with, and so you keep track of this network of incredible people, um, and then you just stay on them. It's about building a relationship and really kind of, you know, chipping away at them until they give up and finally join. But it makes all the difference when you do it. And then more broadly, so I think that's certainly true for the leaders in your company. But then the other challenge, if you need to scale quickly, is you need to go from kind of vigilance and just sort of sheer effort to building a system. Because I remember Arash in the early days. He did not want anyone to join the company unless he had interviewed them. Problem is there are only so many hours in a day, and it's kind of hilarious and tragic to look at his calendar towards the end of that, because he would just have like from morning till night like 10-minute interviews, like break Google Calendar, just because he had so many of these interviews. But it's not sustainable, and it's actually not that even that effective. Just meeting someone for 10 minutes. So we had to translate that we had to become much more systematic about our culture and how we interview, and train everybody who comes into the company to be great interviewers and make sure that they upheld the same high standards.
You're touching on it there, but that idea of culture, and again, a company that goes from very, very small, you probably had a very distinctive culture. How do you, as you scale, how do you retain, a specific culture, and do you have one?
In the beginning, I didn't really even understand what people meant by culture, because it seems to be this like very amorphous thing. Everybody agrees it's important, but like people don't really define what it is. Um, and when we started hitting the breaking point, if you think about that Arash interviewing everyone phase, that was sort of when this came to a head, because the problem is we were like, okay, they're not, because then you're like, all right, they are a culture fit, they're not a culture fit. What does that even mean? And so our solution, what really ended up helping, was stepping back and recognizing, well, what do we mean by culture? Well, um, it's sort of a set of shared beliefs and attitudes about like what's important and how we want to make decisions and how we want to make behave or how we want people to behave. Whether they're in the company or people that we're bringing from outside. Um, and so we're like, all right, let's write it down. And so Arash and I and a small team, obsessed over every little syllable and letter of our 5 company values, and we wanted them to be distinctive. We want to be like, all right, well, if imagine Arash and I disappeared and came back in 10, 20 years, like what do we really hope is still there? And that was kind of the prompt for me to think about. Okay, there's a lot of things you want people to do, and you think about in the typical company, it's like integrity, respect, excellence, customer service, but we wanted to be a little more specific than that, because otherwise it's kind of a joke. But anyway, so we wrote down our 5 company values, and we then were like, all right, well, those are how we want, those are the things we want everybody to consider important. But then we also tied it into our hiring, where we're like, well, we would want these people to embody these things when they get here, but we don't know if they will. And so we thought, all right, well, what are the leading indicators of following our values? So really quickly, I mean, just to go through them, our 5 values are first, be worthy of trust, which on the one hand you think is, yeah, it's kind of self-explanatory, but when you think about it, we are taking care of hundreds of millions of people and millions of businesses, like absolutely most important information, and it doesn't just mean keep the information safe and secure, although that's a huge part of it, but just take care of our users. Be worthy of this immense trust that they've placed in us in all regards. Second is sweat the details, so this sense of craft. And third is aim higher, like, because I think a lot of what kills companies as they become successful is they get complacent. And we want to be a company that does big things. Fourth is we, not I, which is kind of self-explanatory, but just really focusing on the company's success. And people who are kind of political or arrogant tend not to do well here. And then I looked at those four, and I'm like, okay, these are good. They're fairly accurate in terms of what the place is like, and they're also a bit aspirational. I mean, we would like to bat, 1,000 on each of those, but I'm like, God, they're so serious. And so we're like, because there's another whole part of this that's like not reflected here, and so I'm like, what if we just there was an illustrator for like one of our onboarding flows in the product. He made this picture of a smiling like cartoon cupcake, and it's like got little stars coming out of it, and I'm like, what if we just do that? Like not the word cupcake, just like the picture of that cupcake. And so that's our fifth one. And I couldn't wait to see how the company responded, because I was like, are we serious? But I love that, and otherwise we could have said, oh, don't take yourself too seriously, or delight or whatever. But no, it's a picture of a smiling cartoon cupcake.
People got it, I'm sure, did they? I suppose I have to ask you that elephant in the room question, which is you're just, traveled over from Silicon Valley. We're all watching the States at the moment with our jaws slightly open, I have to confess.
Me too.
Tell us a little bit about the reaction over in Silicon Valley, and maybe your own thoughts and going forward in America.
Sure. Well, I think we've all been paying close attention to the election, and it's been a pretty intense few weeks. I think there's still a lot more questions than answers at this point, and for our part, I mean, what we're really focused on and what we hope for, both me personally and as Dropbox the company, we want to uphold. We really care about first civil liberties and making sure that that all of our customers' information is secure, and preserve privacy and security. And then a lot of just make sure that this administration, as any administration should, just upholds the values that upon which the country was founded, which have made it so great, which is just being welcoming to everyone, and the fundamental ideas of equality, and taking care of people from all backgrounds. So that's what we're keeping an eye on in particular.
It's funny because it's the first time I ever met anyone from Dropbox. I think might have been Adrienne, I think, and the thing we were talking about, and this is years ago, was diversity. Sure. And so I know it's something that's very close to your heart and has been for many, many years. And somebody just said something interesting to me the other day. They were saying maybe it's now up to the private sector and corporates to kind of carry those values of diversity and inclusion forward if it's not being reflected at the top in government. I don't know, do you think there's something to that? Or?
Well, I think I hope that really it starts with just the fundamental values of the nation and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the decisions by the Supreme Court. Like, I think these things are really, regardless of who is in office. I mean, I think those things are bigger than any particular leader and really important to uphold. But for sure, and then we translate that within the company to also extending a lot of those ideals to how we recruit and the kind of place and culture that we build. And we want Dropbox to be a really welcoming and inclusive environment for everyone. And we do a lot of work on that front, both within the company and then in our local community. And then we work alongside a lot of other tech companies in the tech sector in general, and work with lawmakers in Washington and so on to make sure that we keep those top of mind.
I love that we had that entire conversation without actually mentioning the name of your president-elect. I feel much better. I don't want to keep you too long because you've been traveling, and thanks a million for taking the time to sit down and share some of those thoughts with us. But I'm very keen to kind of get a feel for you've come so far in those 9 years, but what does the future look like for Dropbox? What's next, and what are your aims and targets?
Well, we talk a lot about evolving Dropbox from keeping your files in sync to keeping teams in sync, and keeping people in sync. And because a lot of our since the beginning, a lot of our happiest users and the problems that we've solved that are most valuable are really around helping teams and people work better together. And I never get tired of hearing stories about how Dropbox has done that, and whether it's a big company like an Adidas, or I was just at a lunch on Monday with a bunch of our customers in London, and I was one of the attendees. He runs a film company, and he had a long list of feature requests and things that he wanted to change. But in the middle of that, he paused and he's like, "Hey," he's like, "I know there's all this stuff that I want, but just so you know, we love Dropbox. Our company would not exist without it." And so we hear stories like that all the time. And then when you think about people's sort of experience at work, there's a lot of room for improvement. When you think about I think McKinsey did a study that brings this into focus, where they said that when they looked at how people work, they're like, all right, 60% of our time is spent managing work. So like doing the work about the work, and only 40% of the time actually doing it, or actually working. And so at first I looked at that stat like any other stat. I'm like, oh yeah, that's, I can see that certainly in my life. But then after thinking about it more, I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, so what this is really saying is like I can take Wednesday, I might as well just take Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday and just light them on fire. It's like I might as well not even have shown up if you think about 60% of your time for this work week and every work week for the rest of my life. And I'm like, oh my God. That is a shocking waste of human potential. And so when you look out beyond, when I think about the next 5 or 10 years, I think Dropbox, I really get excited about the role that Dropbox can play in knocking that 60% down as far as possible. And there's a lot of exciting things that we have cooking, and new ideas for better ways of working. And one example is Dropbox Paper, which it's in public beta, so all of you can check it out and give it a shot. I'm curious what you all think. But within Dropbox already, it's really changed how we work, and it's changed how we run the company, and even better for a lot of our early alpha and beta customers, it has for them too. And so we send and receive a lot less email. It's much easier for everybody to be on the same page. That's just one of many ideas I think or just one of many ideas that we have to make your life at work a little simpler, and a little calmer, and a little better.
Just for those who haven't, maybe used Paper, I'm aware of it. Just what is it?
I could probably describe it for you. It's a magical thing. So Paper, it's a so on the one hand, it's a real-time document editor. So if you like or have used things like Google Docs, it'll probably be pretty familiar. But it ends up being used almost more like a wiki or a home for a company's knowledge. And it's really simple and cleanly designed, and really any project in our company kind of starts as a paper doc. And we've thought about, okay, well, a lot of the other tools you use were designed when the most important thing you did with the document was print it out. So you got a lot of buttons and stuff about formatting and and page layout and so on. But what you really want to do, but when you think about getting people on the same page, you want to know, okay, who's here? What do they know? What do we need to do? How do we get everybody on the same page? Can I use it on my phone? So we're taking advantage of the blank slate we have to redesign a completely new experience. So I find design challenges like that really exciting.
Fantastic. Drew, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. We're going to move on slightly now and look in some detail at the products and things like that, and what's happening in Europe and globally. But Drew, thank you so much. Really wonderful to meet you. Thank you.
Enjoy this video? Click here to get the latest news from SiliconRepublic.com and go find us on social media.